Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time. And as promised in our daily financial news, we are bringing on the one and only Jonathan Twomley. And yes, folks, he is an attorney. So we're going to ask about this eviction moratorium. We're going to ask about the ruling in late June. We're going to ask about this new one. But before we get started, let's welcome Jonathan to the show. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. And what I'm learning from reading this opinion or reading the article about the opinion that you mentioned is that apparently I don't know much about law because the Supreme Court went differently from what I would have expected. But let's dig into this a little bit. So back in June, the Alabama Association of Realtors had brought this suit against the moratorium. They had been they won in the lower courts, but the ruling was stayed pending appeal. Mm-hmm. And so the judge said, hey, I think this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to let the higher courts rule on this before putting this into effect. So what then happened was it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and by 5-4 decision, the court sustained the moratorium, not the ruling of the lower court. They sustained the moratorium, but Justice Kavanaugh, who was the deciding vote by 5-4 margin, said essentially, well, look, this thing is going to expire anyway in a few weeks, and the government has allocated all this money to help the landlords and pay the back rent, and leaving this in place will just help that be more smooth and orderly. So I'm not going to do anything about this. We'll just let this expire on its own. And the administration at the time had said it was not planning on extending the moratorium. So there wasn't really, so essentially Kavanaugh was saying, yeah, I think this is probably unconstitutional, but so what? Because it's going to expire in a month, and let's just let it expire. And so his opinion had said the reason he voted not to end the eviction program was because it was set to expire on July 31st, and because those few weeks will allow for additional and more orderly distribution of the funds that Congress had appropriated already to help landlords, and help people pay their back rent. So now, interestingly enough, there's a couple things going on here. It was a 5-4 decision. I would have actually thought that this would go very much in the other direction, where the most liberal justices, but this actually went across ideological lines, because Kavanaugh and Roberts both voted to sustain the moratorium, and the 3 liberal justices voted to sustain it, and then you've got the 4 other conservative justices who voted against it, as you would expect. I was surprised that Kavanaugh and Roberts went with the liberal wing of the court on this, and also surprised that it wasn't really kind of all the other direction. So now, interestingly enough, if you look at that language of what Kavanaugh said about why he was going to let it continue, he said because it's going to expire soon anyway, and the government needs a little more time to extend, to get the funds out. Now, that's exactly what the new moratorium does. It tracks this language. It's basically aimed right at Justice Kavanaugh, because the new moratorium says it's for 2 months, and the purpose is to help the government get out the funds that have already been allocated. So it's aimed right at him, and kind of saying, hey, this is what you said the last time. We're doing exactly what you said, so sustain us again. Now, I could see in this case, just reading this article, which is very short, it seems like some of the issue, it seems like the court was pretty much in agreement, again, which surprises me, that Congress could do this, right? Congress could pass a law saying there's a moratorium, but the CDC didn't have the power to do it on its own, right? And so part of the issue was, well, Congress ought to go pass another law. And, Kavanaugh, so the issue really isn't about whether the federal government has the power to do this. It's about whether the CDC has the power to do it on its own.
Correct.
And seems like the court has said, yeah, the Congress can do this, right? The Congress has the power to do this. So Congress, if you want this to happen, go do it again, pass another law. I think you could see a situation where if this gets ruled on again before the expiration in 2 more months, that I could very easily imagine Kavanaugh saying like, hey, this is overreaching, and federal government can do this, but it's got to be through legislation from Congress. So Congress, go do it if this is what you want to do. But the CDC is beyond its power. I could see it going either way, frankly, based on the limited, on the one hand, you've got the very limited scope. It's 2 more months. It's aimed at getting the money out. Kavanaugh might say, okay, fine. On the other hand, I could also see him saying, hey, enough is enough. Like,
yeah,
this is,
well, that's exactly where we are. And the reason I wanted to talk to you as an attorney, because it's Alabama, right? That was what we did. This, yeah. They have just filed yesterday an emergency filing at the federal court level, basically trying to get it back in front of the Supreme Court, is my non-attorney speak.
Yeah, that's what they, because what the Supreme Court does is it like kicks it back downstairs.
Yep.
To like implement the ruling. And so, but they've essentially said like, hey, we're just going to sustain the stay. Now the Realtors Association is probably going back to court. They've amended their complaint. They've said things have changed.
Yeah,
rule on this again. And so, and hopefully they're gonna try to get it back up to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible. So it could happen, because I don't think the issues really have to be briefed that much again, right? Because it'll probably be very narrow briefing on like, hey, something to the effect of like, this is, Congress needs to act on this. The CDC doesn't have the power. I'm sure they've already briefed all these issues, ad nauseum. So, I think it may go back up fairly quickly.
Now, so that's the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because the average, non-attorney thinks this stuff happens in a vacuum and quickly. So they filed the emergency motion at the lower court, essentially initiating the process to get it back to the Supreme Court, because again, non-attorney speak, the powers that be lied. They said they weren't going to do it. The Supreme Court said, okay, I get it. You can have it. But now they're going to have to vote again. And again, I guess Brett Kavanaugh could go, hey, yeah, okay, 2 more months, what begins? But at some point, it's already been extended 5 times. What makes you think it won't be a 6th time? And the CDC has never been given this authority. What the hell?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, he made a very kind of practical, common sense ruling before, but which was just like, hey, it's expiring anyway, so just let it run for another month. But I could definitely see that at some point it becomes an issue of kind of constitutional principle, and then it's like, hey, enough is enough, right? So
does the Constitution matter or not? I mean, that's where I'm at in all this thing.
I could see him going either way in this for sure. But I think at some point you'll see like the enough is enough, like, kind of hammer come down, right? So and it could be on this go around, or the ruling could be sort of, I could also see a split the baby ruling, which is essentially like, we'll give you these last 2 months, but if this gets extended again, we're going to declare it unconstitutional, and that'll be the end of it. Like, so this is, it might be like, hey, this is really like the last chance at this. So that would be like the 3rd option, right? So, I mean, the 3 options, let's just put it this way. I don't see this thing going beyond 2 more months, because I think that will just get, that like Roberts and Kavanaugh will just have it like say enough is enough, right? So
now, how fast do you think it goes back to the Supreme? Like, is it hours, days, weeks, months?
I mean, it's probably, well, because it would become moot in 2 more months, right? It's going to go quickly, relatively quickly, but it has to be, I mean, it really depends. Like I was in court on injunctions where, you ran into court and, with your briefing, your request for a TRO, which you had like done in a couple of hours as fast as you could, you run into the court, they might put a stay right away, but they're giving the other side a chance to brief the issue. So they'll give them a couple of days to brief it. And then you've got like maybe 1 day to reply, and then the court's going to rule on a permanent injunction. So it can happen pretty fast, but then you've got like appeals. And I mean, I just remember from dealing with this before that we had essentially all at the same time, like wrote our motion for, for a temporary restraining order. And then at the same time started writing our appeals brief, assuming that the court denied it. Right. Mm-hmm. And then immediately. And so we would write that ahead of time because we kind of knew what the arguments were going to be.
Right.
So I can imagine that they've got like teams of lawyers already briefing this stuff, and they've already briefed these issues, so they can kind of like revive, they can reuse a lot of the stuff that they've done already. So it could move pretty quickly to go up. So I'm sure that, they're asking the court for immediate relief, but this court is still going to give the government at least a couple of days to respond to the briefing, right? I mean, to respond to it. And then the Alabama realtors are going to have like, 1 day to reply probably. So it could be a week at the lower court, and then they'll probably make some emergency application to go right to the Supreme Court without having to go to the appellate court in the interim. And so
this,
I don't know, maybe,
yeah,
it could be in front of the court again in a couple of weeks.
That's what I wanted. So a couple of weeks. So again, the wheels of justice turn slow. However, this is a hot issue. They've been briefed once. They've really ruled once. So again, it's at the lower court process 4 or 5 business days because they don't operate on the weekend, I'm guessing. Then it could really be in the Supreme Court as soon as 2 weeks from now. Let's call it 2 to 3 weeks. Is that a fair, just a guess with your experience as an attorney?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah, I mean, and anyway, with giving the lawyers, time, the time that includes weekends. I mean, the court will expect the lawyers to be working on the weekends, but the court won't be open on a weekend, except, well, that's not true. In really extreme cases, there's always some court available that's open that you can go to if you need it.
I didn't know.
Right now, right? Or you can get the judge out of bed. I mean, honestly, like you could, if it's some real emergency, like somebody's building a bomb next to, some kind of crazy thing like that, you could something. But normally, for something like this, that's not going to happen. They're going to, they'll say, okay, counselor will appear before me on Monday,
Right.
So.
Okay. So it would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I heard you say is we should expect this to go back to the Supreme Court. I think that's a fair expectation, and probably have them rule sometime in August. Is that?
Yeah, I'm
fair?
saying it could be that fast, given the history of the case.
Okay, very cool. Well, Jonathan, this has been very educational. I appreciate you doing this. How can people be a part of your world?
Yeah, so come join me in the multifamily investment community on Facebook. It's a free /BS free group about multifamily investing, and we just try to have a lot of fun in the group and be educational. So if you want to join, just look us up on Facebook, and there's 3 questions you have to answer to get into the group. And Facebook only shows them to you on a computer, unfortunately. So the first time, come on a computer and answer the questions, and then you can always use your phone after that to participate in the discussion. I always like to hear when people are found out about the group from here. So just drop it into one of the questions. Just add, "Hey, I heard about you on Mike Zuber's show," and I just like to see that. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Jonathan. This helped me out a lot.
Sure.